Today on King Yoga's podcast, we have Nicky Knoff of Australia. Where are you? Queensland, is that right?
Yes, King's Beach on the Sunshine Coast.
Sounds nice. I'm in a rainy Sydney right now, so over in Australia, trying to take the most of the opportunity to interview people on this time zone. As usually, or oftentimes I find myself in Europe, struggling with time zones. So now we have a whole range of Australian guests coming up, and Nicky was recommended to me as I was teaching recently in the centre, Ashtanga Yoga Melbourne. I think that's the name of their centre. Should know it. And you were doing a training there recently, I think. So they recommended me to interview you.
So I was doing an Ashtanga, not an Ashtanga, Knopf yoga teacher training, the discovery, the very first level, and it's the Ashtanga Yoga Centre in Melbourne.
Ashtanga Yoga Centre. And your name actually is Nicky Knoff, isn't it?
Yes.
I had made a mental register to say that because I heard someone else making that very mistake on another podcast. And the K is actually a hard K.
Yes.
Which,
it's actually a Norwegian name. My ex-husband was Norwegian, and we actually lived in Norway for some time, for a year. I speak Norwegian too.
Well, you learnt Norwegian in a year? Or you were building it up with your husband, etc.?
In 3 months. No, he was no help at all. I had to learn by myself, but because my mother's English and my father's Dutch, and I was born in Indonesia, I was brought up trilingual. And then it's always much easier to learn another language, you know? Yes.
Onto your illustrious past and background. And if people, I mean, I know that there's other people who have done the interviews with you, but you're a very senior yoga teacher. Where did you first start? Take it from the start. Please let us know about how you got into yoga. But prior to that, the background in Indonesia, I found very interesting on another podcast I listened to. So
yes, so we were in Indonesia, and when the war was about to break out, my father said to my mother, "Take the children to Australia. It's the land of milk and honey, and nothing's going to happen there, so you'll be fine." But he couldn't leave because he had his company, and also it was a Dutch colony, so he had to stay to be called up in the army for the war. And my mother didn't leave his side because she didn't want to. And it was just as well, because the people who left in boats, just like they still do nowadays, got torpedoed. And many of them lost their lives and drowned. The ones who swam back to the coast got interned anyway. So we were in prison of war camp. And in prison of war camp was Nettie, my mother's good friend, her age, and her son Philip. And so, and strangely enough, my father was called up to the Burma Railway, and his best friend was the father of this family, Jonas Krefeld. And so at the end of the war, it was not until the end of the war, when we all got together and all had survived, that we realized we had befriended in the same family. You know, but years later, we were living in Hong Kong, and my mother decided not to let us be brought up with servants. So she sent us to boarding school in Geelong, in Victoria, Geelong Grammar, and we had to have someone responsible for us in the country. So Nettie and Jonas, in the meantime, had moved to Melbourne. So that was close to Geelong, and I took every opportunity to go and see her, get away from boarding school. And she was doing yoga. This from the ages of when I was 13 to 19. And she said, "Oh, you must do yoga one day, look into yoga." She was very for it. She was going to the Gita School of Yoga in Melbourne, and I was playing hockey, playing tennis, playing baseball, swimming, skiing. I moved a lot. I did a lot of sports and was in sports teams and so on. And I thought, this yoga is really boring. There's nothing happening. That was my attitude then. But years later, I was moving from Tasmania to Tokyo, and I phoned her, as she became my great friend too. And I phoned her from Melbourne, and she was in a hospital, and she was dying of cancer and not taking any medication, dealing with her pain through yoga. And people, my mother in the meantime and father too, had come to Australia, and they'd visit her bedside, and it was as if they'd been to a party. She was in such a good state of mind, and she was dying. So when she actually died, I was in Tokyo, and I had to find out who to go for yoga teacher. There was Oki, the Zen guy who brought in a lot of Zen ideas, and also he smoked a cigar and drank whiskey after his session, after his practice. And I thought, that's not quite the right thing, I feel. Then there was a very fat, pregnant Indian woman who seemed very lazy. And then the other person was Bikram Chowdhury, at 26. Just come from India before he became...
that was in Tokyo?
In Tokyo.
You met him in Tokyo. And what year would that be? I mean, just kind of back in...
1970.
1970. I mean, the war, obviously the war you're talking about would have been the Second World War?
Yes.
I mean, I say that kind of critically because, I mean, that just to say you're still going strong. I mean, the training that we just talked about in Melbourne was a week or two, wasn't it? Training. It was quite an intensive training you've just done, and already, I mean, is that correct?
Yes, I'll be 87 in July.
Well, it's a testament to something. I mean, I kind of find those weeks of intensives difficult, even at my age.
Right,
so sorry, Nicky.
When I know the people I was at boarding school since we were 12 and 13, and now we're in our 80s, where there are not many of us left. And some of the ones I've met don't drive a car, don't travel. They're on frames and walking sticks. And so it's the power of yoga, really. The only difference between me and them is yoga practice, I mean, I can't do what I could do when I was 60, but I can still move. I can still get on my mat every morning and do my practice as best I can, Yeah.
And before coming to, obviously, your position on yoga and your trainings, etc., I mean, there must have been incredibly... I mean, how many years were you in the prisoner of war camp?
It was nearly 4 years.
4 years?
When I was nearly 4 to when I was nearly 8. Yeah, it was a long war in the East. Yeah.
So you must have had a lot, I mean, in modern terms, what we'd say a lot of trauma to unpick by the time you came to yoga.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because at a certain stage, the Dutch government decided they were going to give us some money, but we had to, if there was any trauma or any residue disabilities or anything that we were suffering from being in the camp. And so I went through all the tests, and my brother got his money because he had a heart attack. He's a farmer, and he was lifting milk cans onto the back of a truck. And what they said then, they thought he'd had a heart attack, but I don't think he had. But anyway, he got his money, and my last questions were from a psychiatrist. And by this time, we were in Colorado, where we set up a yoga school, the Academy of Yoga. And he said, I'll just spend 10 minutes with you. And so I came, and 2.5 hours later, I was out of there. But what I saw when I came in his room was 2 walls, big, long walls, full of books on the World War II. So I said, so this is your subject. He was a psychiatrist. And at the end of the session, he said, there's no way, if I'm truthful, that you're going to get your money. I said, no, that's what I want you to be, is to be truthful. I don't want this money under any other circumstance. So he said, but what have you done to be so normal and to have no trauma from this, And I said, well, yoga, that's the only thing, and meditation. I'm a Vipassana meditator too, and I think that's probably what did it. And the beauty about it is, when I think about it, is you don't need anything else but to get on your mat and get on your meditation cushion and do pranayama and do yoga. You don't need any gestalt or any talking to anyone, because the mind is like sand, and there are three people who need to understand about your problem. You have to tell the problem as it is. There's the problem, and the person has to really understand and then give you information. Well, it's just better to do it silently by yourself on your mat and on your cushion, on your thing, pranayama and meditation and so on. It definitely works, I feel.
When people say a lot of stuff comes up on the mat,
yes,
for you that must have certainly been the case, that all these memories, etc., and experiences must have been quite visceral in your experience of yoga, at least at the start.
And also in meditation, I do Goenka, Vipassana meditation. And at first, I used to have this cough that would come up. And luckily, my mother was still alive. And I told her about it. And she said, well, something I didn't remember. When you were about 4, we moved from one camp to another. And it meant walking through the jungle at night. People would just lie down and die, not be able to walk. Then we'd get to a station and get on a train. And of course, because we never were in a car or anything, I used to get car sick, And so I was about to vomit, and my mother didn't know how much longer we'd be in that train. And we were at a station, and she opened the window, which we were not allowed to do, and put my head out the window to vomit so that we wouldn't have to put up with it. We didn't know how long we were going to be in the train. And she saw this shadow in the night of this Japanese guard about to cut off my head with a bayonet. Pulled me in, and I caught my throat on the window and was coughing away. Then he came in, and by that time I'd stopped coughing, and no one said a thing. And luckily he let it go, But things like that happen, and I hadn't remembered that. But when I said that about this cough that I had, that was obviously some skara, as they call it in Vipassana, that I had to work through, And it took quite a few years of meditation before it went. Yes.
I've kind of speechless after that one. Oh my God. I don't think I've ever heard the like on the podcast. Wow. Yeah, that's quite enough trauma to have.
Anyway, so I started with Bikram Chowdhury.
Yeah.
He was 26 years old. He was a real Indian, followed all the precepts and was fine, but then because there were a lot of Americans in Tokyo, they sort of got him to come to probably about 2.5 years I worked with him. And then he went to Hawaii and went to America and just lost the plot as far as yoga's concerned, His brother, Buddhadev, was still in Tokyo, and I used to go and just practice with him. He didn't really teach, but I sometimes went to practice with him. And I was one of probably 300 people who Bikram taught. And just one day he said to me, "Oh, Nicky, I've got visa problems. Please, will you take..." He worked from 5 a.m. until 11 at night, and you could come anytime.
This is Bikram's brother by now.
This is Bikram.
Bikram himself, right? Yeah. This is the early days, the first 2 years when you were with Bikram himself. And
during that time, he said to me one day, "Oh, Nicky, you stay and teach the rest of the people who were coming, that you could come any hour, any time, and you just had sort of a private. So I was just to make sure I was there when no one else was there. And anyway, I said, oh no, Bikram, I'm never going to be a teacher. I'm not teaching, etc., etc. And he said, but you're just doing it to help me out because I've got these problems. So I did. And I found how interesting not to just get myself into these postures, but to have challenge of different people. This is very interesting. Nuns would come in their habits and then change into black leotards and black tops so that they still couldn't see their bodies. And all sorts of different people were coming. And so it was interesting, but I always resisted teaching. I never thought I was going to teach. I'm just a learner. I'm just a student, So
how was Bikram's teaching at that time? What was he teaching you? How did you find him? I mean, in those early years, you said he lost the plot when he came to America.
Yeah,
obviously you liked him then.
It was Ghosh's Yoga College of India. He was seriously, vegetarian, following all the precepts, etc., etc. And he was bona fide. He was right, but when he went to, and so it was Ghosh's Yoga College of India. You do everything twice, and that was 2 series, the first and the second series. And he was fine, and because I was always athletic, I found that it was a fine practice. I was 33 years old then. And
did they have the heat? Was the heat in the room? Was that a part of it
no,
at that time? No,
that
not
was
at that time.
just an American idea.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it was just American idea. And then, of course, 5 years later, I actually was on my way to England to see my family. And I passed through Los Angeles. So I dropped in to see them. I had 2 little children, hair-haired, blue-eyed children who were like their father. And I walked in, and Bikram knew them too. He'd been most amused because when my son kept saying to me, he was 3 years old, he said, I want to see your Indian yoga teacher. I want to see your Indian. So I brought him to him, and then he looked up at him and said, where are your feathers? He was expecting a radian. So Bikram thought that was a huge joke. So when I walked in to Hollywood, his Hollywood, and there was women with sequins and dripping with jewels and beautiful shiny leotards and so on. And one was massaging his back as he was teaching there. And when he walked in, I wondered whether he'd know me because it was 5 years later. But anyway, he recognized me and he said, Nicky, have you got time? I'm just finishing my class. I'll be with you. So he came and talked with me. Afterwards, he sent me in his, some very posh, big, open limousine with a driver back to the airport to go to England. So I thought, how things have changed. He didn't even have a car in Tokyo. He was very, very down to earth, And so then, as you might have seen in the film of him, he's really...
I did.
Degenerated, and now he's in India, having run away from his wife and family, but they haven't caught him. He's got all sorts of misdemeanors that he's got to face. Yes, that's my first yoga teacher. But then, because he was teaching a stronger style, whenever I traveled, I used to go to yoga teachers. So I've been to many yoga teachers, Shivananda, Satchidananda, you name it. I always found if I could find an Iyengar teacher in those years, that they were well trained, usually, they knew about alignment and knew about things. It's also very rigid. We always found them very unfriendly people compared to the Ashtangis. And so years later, Iyengar used to keep us back. He never let us work in the more advanced postures. So we used to, James and I, my husband, present husband, we used to work together, and we were working from the book, Light on Yoga. We were in the third series, and we were finding we didn't have the strength for the bird postures, So we were swimming across the river in Noosa. We were living there.
Where were you at that time?
In Noosa, on the Sunshine Coast, Noosa.
Okay, right, okay. So you're back in Australia by this time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we were wearing orange bathing caps so that we wouldn't get run over by the boats, and swimming across the river to get more strength. We've got to have the training effect. That has to come from yoga. And then there was an article in the yoga magazine about Pattabhi Jois. It's the first we heard of him. And that was December and January. We were there in Mysore.
When was that? What year?
In 1989.
God, you remember the year as well, just like that.
And so we went to Mysore, and we knew the postures, but we weren't there. We didn't know the linking. So we were there, and actually, who was there? Brian Kest was there with us, Graham Northfield,
Yeah.
John Scott, Peter Sanson. They were all there. Graham had been there before, and so had Brian Kest. Brian Kest had been there 6 months, and Pattabhi Jois took us through first, second, and third series, just like that, in 3 months, because we knew the postures, but we didn't know the linking. So, And we decided, it was because Iyengar, in his wisdom, decided not to teach the Surya Namaskar or the Vinyasa, that we had the strength that we needed for the more advanced postures. So we did that, and Brian Kest kept saying, Guruji, I've been here. You know how they always want another pose. We were just, amused by the sort of, it's just like being back at school, really.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. I thought Iyengar, I think I was taught when I was taught in the Iyengar in the 2000s. Didn't you get taught Surya Namaskars as a warm up to the start of the class, or did you just go straight into asana?
He used to.
He just go straight in.
Yeah, yeah.
No Surya Namaskar.
In the very beginning, he did teach Surya Namaskar, but then dropped them for some reason, and it seemed very rigid to us too. Between how they jumped into the postures, their arms out and so on. And also we've been to a lot of yoga schools to visit. When we were in America to set up our yoga school, we visited so many yoga schools, and the only one yoga school that we went to where the teacher knew what he was doing he was a Nigerian teacher who was in Santa Barbara, and he was a senior Iyengar teacher. But we thought everyone in America had been Bangwis teachers, but we were amazed, really. Sometimes we'd go to three classes a day, and as we traveled, we'd go to the local class and so on. But we were amazed at the standard of yoga. I feel it's much better in Australia than it was in America in 2000,
Right.
I'm talking about 2000 to 2005. And we set up in Colorado in Grand Junction, which was skiing, mountain bike, snowboarding country.
Why did you go there? You've been everywhere. You've travelled around the world constantly. You just wanted to go there.
Oh, no, James is American.
Okay,
and he wanted to be in California, where he was from, but it was just too expensive to set up. As we flew on the plane must have been from Brisbane to Los Angeles, the Australian dollar dropped to half. We went with 6,000. When we landed, we were $3,000, $60,000, $30,000. And so when we had to set up, we had to borrow money from one of our yoga friends who lives with Patty McGrath. Do you know her?
I've heard of
She's the
her.
backbend queen. She just stands up out of bed and goes back and holds her ankles and says, I feel rather stiff today. I wish I felt stiff like that, Patty. So, yes, she lives out of a rucksack, very simply. She's a yogi, and she had a lot of money because she was in Sri Lanka, and the Red Cross, she was there, volunteers abroad she's an agriculturalist, and she was teaching them to grow mangoes or papayas, and the elephants came through and ruined the papaya crop. So then she got them to have goats. And when they started eating the goats, she couldn't bear it anymore, being a yogi, She said, just use the wool, don't eat the goats. But anyway, she's still a strict vegetarian. And why did I start talking about Patty? Oh, she's the one who lent us the money. And she has a rucksack. She lives on the floor. She has a little Buddha and a little Ganesh and a yoga mat, and that's it. But she had the money because she speaks the two Sri Lankan languages, and she's Irish, English, fair-haired, blue-eyed, So during the war, she earned a lot of money for the Red Cross, going to the prisons and translating for them, more money than we ever earn in yoga, except for some of the ones in America. Yeah.
So at that time you were in the US, were you teaching Ashtanga or I mean, you were teachers by then. So how did your teaching career go?
We were teaching. Yes. So by that time, we were practicing and teaching Ashtanga only. We actually went to Maui to work for Nancy. She had not had a holiday for 6 months, and we taught her classes for 5.5 months while she took a holiday. And we were teaching Ashtanga then. Actually, do you know Helena Berg? Helena Berg?
Yeah.
She's one of those old yogis, and she actually taught us 4 series in Maui, although she was our student there in the classes, So we were there, and when we finished, we thought seriously about staying because they said, do stay. But Nancy said, it's my business, etc., etc. So we just left and went to America instead, just to respect her, although I think some other people have set up there as well.
I'm sure. And so how long did you practice Ashtanga for? So you did a Bikram for a while, a Iyengar for a period of time, and then Ashtanga, just to get a kind of chronology of your experience.
Yes. I had been doing Iyengar for 18 years by the time I got to Mysore, and then we just practiced Ashtanga. We said, this is the way to go. But with the alignment of Iyengar, we actually have a line on our mat and so on. The women in Ilaria in Melbourne would have told you a few of the things. And we find it really works. In front of me, I had Gilles, who came from France in Mysore, and he was jumping across his mat all the time, diagonally across his mat. And he said to me, why have I got a sore hip? And so I said, because you're not jumping straight back and so on. So in the afternoons, we often used to hold little clinics round the pool. And actually, who was there was Ray Long, who was writing his book, the anatomy book, at the time. So we had a lot of interesting discussions with him. And actually, when his book first came out, there was some mistake. We wrote to him and told him, and then we thought he might give us a free book, but he never did or never acknowledged. But the next time we saw the edition, they had been corrected.
Changed the mistakes, but no free book. So you practiced Ashtanga for quite a while, right?
Yes, it would have been probably 12 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
and went to Mysore more than once, or just that one time when you learnt all three series?
Just that
Right.
one time. That Ekapada Bhairavajasana, Patabi Joyce lay on top of me, pubis to pubis, made me touch both my toes to the floor, which shouldn't happen in that posture at all, because your back is rounded, and that was that noise. And so I said, oh, well, I was up to that in third series. And so I said, oh, he jumped off. And I said, I'm fine, I'll just keep going. But when I lay down in Shavasana, I could hardly move after that because I'd done something to my psoas muscle. So I stayed away a week. I came back, just sorted it out with Iyengar therapy that I know, and then came back a week, but it took me 3 months to heal that. But I still continued. And actually then, James was the only one who wasn't injured in the class, from the adjustments. Yeah. I don't know. Do you know this book by Matthew Remsky? It's not very popular.
I have seen that. Yeah.
But he quotes me in there.
Does he? Right.
Yes. But
what are you saying? What are you saying about your experience then?
I'm saying to him, yes, I told him that story. And I said, yes, he did abuse the people. And when I was going, I was actually phoned up by Dina Kingsburg. She says she didn't do it, but I had people in the room with me when I accepted that phone call. She said, Nicky, be careful. I hear you're going to Ashtanga, to Patabi Joyce. He does, a moral adjustment. And I said, oh, I just laughed at her. Don't worry. He won't even look at me. I'm 48 or whatever I was. He'll be with the other girls. Then I arrived there, and there are 9 of us, and I'm the only female. So, Ekapada Trivikramasana, he's with his pubis right on my pubis, and I say things like, shall we dance? He just laughed because the whole room laughed. But, the first day we were there, James looked back through his dog pose legs and saw Patabi Joyce with me in Baddha Konasana, with his pubis right into me and holding my breasts, and I'm pushing his hands away and saying, bad man. He didn't speak much English then. Bad man and bad lady was about all he knew. Anyway, James said, shall we leave? And I said, no, I'll manage him. We've come here to learn. I'll live with him. And so, it was annoying because he gave me much more attention than he did the men. And it was awkward, it's not good. So it is true that he was like that. And the awful part was that Amma was there, scrubbing the floors or being there close by, knowing exactly what was going on. It was awful for her, really. But then the minute someone else turned up, I was so delighted.
I bet you were. You never spoke out at the time, I suppose, because no one else was, or?
Yes, no, I was just there to learn. So I just, dealt with him, pushed him away and dealt with him.
Did you learn? Did you learn?
Yes.
What did you learn from? Yeah, you did.
Learned
You think you learned?
how he was taught himself, so that it was well worth it, well worth going. It was very good. But he didn't, if you ever asked a question, he would answer in Sanskrit. And you wouldn't be any the wiser. You couldn't ask him any questions. You get on your mat and you do, find out for yourself, in other words. Yeah. And actually, once after I'd been with Iyengar for about 13 years, I said to him, how is it you never tell us about Mulabandha and Uddiyana Minor and Mulabandha Major and Jalandhara Bandha? And he said, that's for you to find out. And I thought, it's just like the old Tai Chi teachers. I've done quite a lot of Tai Chi and Qigong too. And they just don't divulge the secrets, Whereas when I teach, I tell people everything I know, because the more people know, the more they're able to work properly, Yes. If you know it.
Me too.
Also, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I want to get you speaking about your teaching now as much as possible, and how you got from Ashtanga to what you teach today, and how it informs it or is in contrast to it, perhaps. So we know exactly where you stand with your teaching. Because the reason I got you on the podcast from Ilaria is because she was speaking so highly of your teaching and what you were doing. She had some ailments, I think a knee and a hip, and she said how well your teaching had really healed that.
Yeah. So when we were in Grand Junction, we had instructors for skiing and snowboarding and mountain bike champions, all the fittest people. And we were teaching full-on Ashtanga. And they said, Nicky and James, we don't want to be yogis. We just want something that improves our abilities in snowboarding or whatever we're doing, And so we had to sort of make it. We blended the two, Iyengar and Ashtanga, And so we still kept the Surya Namaskar. Because when I first taught in Tokyo, no one needed the Bhumi Namaskar. I don't know if you've seen the squat sequence we do, but
that was what Ilaria, the host in Melbourne, was talking about. So what is that? The Bhumi Namaskar.
So we've got a series. If you look, probably on the website, it's probably Tomoko, one of my students who's been with me since 1991 or 1990. She's a master student, and she does it. And so it used to be necessary for Japanese, but now I find when Japanese come to Cairns, for instance, there's quite a few there, that they're sitting in furniture, so they need it. And what it is just, it's for the joints more than for the muscles. Of course, it's for both, but it's a way of warming up the joints. And when you look at all the movements that there are, they're just taken out of yoga, and they're all the movements we need for the advanced postures. And if we start already right in the beginning, actually it starts in foundation, because if you teach people first thing these things, they never come back again, and you want them come back. So we usually teach them in the next level, in foundation. And if you can do all those movements, you can do all the advanced postures. They're really all openings of the ankles, knees, and hips, back. And
where did you find that series?
Well, it doesn't exist. It's out of yoga, and it's just something I put together. But it's must have had about 30 years of work, and not just with us, but with other people. And it seems to be valuable. It seems to help them. Yeah. And it definitely, if there's anything wrong with any parts of your hips or something, what happened with Iyengar was I often used to help him whenever I was in Pune. In the medical classes, he'd ask some of us to come and help him, and we'd help him there. And so when I was in Dunedin, this was in 1974, the physios from the hospital asked me to come and teach a woman who had, she was only 19, she was a Maori, and she had delivered her baby naturally and everything, but she'd had a stroke. And so it was Christmas time, and they were closing for 3 weeks. And they said, could you come and teach her and show us what you're about to do? And then she could do yoga with you for 3 weeks. Well, she turned up and she was holding her baby, and the baby was lovely because it was used to being unsafe, so it really clung on to you like a monkey, with held the baby, it really hugged you. But because she wasn't very strong, and she was walking with a stick and had an arm in a sling, had the shakes, and so on. Well, she was a very good student, very keen to get better because she was so young. And in those 3 weeks, within the first few days, let's throw away the stick, let's throw away the sling, and so on. So I worked with therapy with her, really. And then 3 weeks later, the physios came back. And I said, yeah, I'll only work with her, but the more stimulation she has, the better. So when you come back, she works with you as well. We continued to, but she went to the Crippled Children's Center, that's what it was called in those days, and applied for a manual car, and they said, what happened to you? And she said, well, I did yoga. And they said, bring your yoga teacher to me, to us. Anyway, so that's how I started. For 10 years, I worked with those people. The first day when they invited me, I invited all the other yoga teachers and anyone in my classes who complained about legs too short, arms too long, or anything. I told them, come with me, because once they came with me, they never complained about anything again. So when I first came, there's this room full of people in wheelchairs, people on, you can imagine, walkers, walking.
Well, I mean, I've always been curious about Iyengar's medical use of yoga. What kind of things did he tell you? What kind of things did Iyengar teach you that you used in practice for these kind of cases?
It's just really still doing all the postures, but working towards it. And he has all the equipment, It looked like the Crimean War because we also bandaged the heads in some cases for migraines. It works beautifully.
So what would you say are the primary influences on your teaching then? Would it be Iyengar, or would you say that Ashtanga still influences your modern teaching? Or I mean, and also I'd like you to mention about Goenka as well, because you had a particular relationship with Goenka and the Vipassana, which I think you bring into your teaching as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, when I first went to Goenka, it was because of the students in my classes, the students who never came out of the pose, who never gave up, were the Vipassana meditators. And I started saying to them, so you're a Vipassana meditator. And they'd say, how do you know? They used to think I'm psychic. I said, no, it's just the way you work. Now, when your teacher comes here I was in Auckland then, Auckland University, the Department of Physical Education. I taught there. And they said, he's coming. So I was going for 10 days. And my husband, he was with Cadbury Schweppes. And so he was traveling to Japan. That's how we went to live in Japan. And he was off to Malaysia. And he said, no, you're not allowed to go. And I said, I'm your mate. I'm not your child. We had 2 children. And he said, what about the children? Anyway, I said, something will turn up. And who turned up was my cousin from Holland with his girlfriend. He was now 26. The last time I saw him, he was 4 on a tricycle in Holland. And I dragged him in the door. I said, you're going to look after my children for a whole week, 10 days, and I'm going on this course. And in exchange, I'll give you my little car, and you can travel all around the South Island in it. So that's what they did. And so when my husband came home, unfortunately, one day early, he noticed I wasn't there. He found out that I'm at this course. But I encouraged a lot of my students to come too, because I said it's really good, never having been myself, but knowing the Vipassana meditators. And actually...
What about Goenka himself? I mean, you met Goenka and had conversations with Goenka. I mean, I suppose Lahel's Goenka, and I mean,
yes.
famously,
And
obviously,
so-
he doesn't allow yoga, but you actually, I know from another podcast, he allowed you to teach other people a bit of yoga for the meditation. Is that right?
Well, no, he said to me, would you teach the students how to sit? So he called me up and he said, and would you be on the committee to set up a Vipassana center here? And I said, sure, another thing to do. And so I got very involved with them. And at that stage, New Zealand was having not enough petrol. And every day there was the houses in 1, 3, all the odd numbers could drive, but the even numbers could not. And so we'd pick each other up. New Zealanders are very friendly, as islanders always are. And so we'd pick each other up on the days they couldn't drive their cars, you know. So it was a very difficult time. And we thought, how are we going to set up the center? But now there's a big thriving center there. You know, people just donate. They donate their time. Your first 10 days was free accommodation, teaching and everything. And it's a wonderful system.
And you still practice it today?
Yes.
And does it kind of integrate into your asana teachings, or is it a completely separate thing?
I sometimes teach it. He said, just encourage the people to come to Vipassana. So I usually, in a class when we've got through the things that we need, because we're there, how many hours a day is it? Might be 7 hours a day, the course, teacher training course, or is it 8? Anyway, and then sometimes, you know, they're just too tired for doing anything physical or thinking too much, and then we do Vipassana meditation. And one woman once, when I was in Melbourne doing a course, called on me to the big honchos, and I wrote to them and said, well, you've got nothing to say because Goenka encouraged me to do this. I use his tape and him and everything.
I know, I did hear that. I did hear you say on another podcast. I think it's the best answer. It's like, well, he himself endorsed me. So
yes.
I wish I could say something like that when I get called out for something. Actually, ask so-and-so, the actual instigator of that system. And he,
yes.
that was a brilliant comeback.
There's no proof now.
No. But, okay, I mean, to round up then, what are your, what are the kind of linchpins of your teaching? If someone's coming to a training of yours, and hopefully you go on many years to come, how does it distinguish itself from, say, Iyengar or from Ashtanga? You know, what would we expect from your teaching?
You know, it's what works. I've had such a broad background of being lucky to travel so much and go to so many teachers. Sometimes I've learned what definitely not to do. But
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But just what works. And what we've done is have devised a system where we're moving still, you know, and once they know the postures, then we do it with vinyasa, just like Ashtanga. But it takes a while to learn the postures properly, bit by bit, you know. So the discovery in foundation, we already they start knowing it. And once they know it, intermediate, once they know it after teacher training the first few days, it depends on the people, whether it's a week I take them through, or 5 days, or 3 days. If they've been working with my teachers, our teachers, then they're way ahead already, you know. And so, James, come and meet Adam.
I will interview.
Come on, I want you to go. This is James, my husband.
Hi, James.
How are you, lad? I can't hear you. Said the headphones over.
No, indeed. Yeah, very good.
All right. Going well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Leave it to it.
Thanks. Yeah.
So James is the man who does all the administrative work and all the stuff I don't like to do. I like to just be on the floor with the people, you know. So I'm very grateful to him. And also he's a Virgo, and he has a very good brain. He's really an accountant. And so when we work things out together, when we practice together, we used to adjust each other and help each other a lot. That's been very helpful.
So you've always kind of learnt together the yoga, both of you, and then now you teach together.
Well, he was my student at one stage.
Right.
They say never to get involved with your students, but somehow he was the one who insisted. As you see, he's 15 years younger than I am, and I chased him away, actually. I chased him away to find a young woman, but he kept coming back. So in the end, we got married. He said, who else wants to get up at 4 a.m. and practice? But yoga, no end. We were only eating fruit in those days. Eat only fruit. We were fruitarian. Really? And all those things. So, he wanted to have children. That's why I chased him away. Mine was 17 and 18. I'd done my bit, I thought.
What do your kids do now? Anything to do with yoga or stay well clear?
My son is a Tang Su Dao practitioner. Of course, they don't do anything their mother does, except my daughter is Vipassana meditator. But my son said at one stage, I guess he was about 19, he said, Mum, I need to do the sideways splits. Come and show me what to do. I looked at his hips and thought, thank God he's got his father's hips. He'll probably do it, because I've got hips that don't allow me to do full sideways splits. And so he practiced what I taught him, and in 6 months he had it. He's like that. And he's actually in Mogadishu. He decided at 6 years old that he was going to be an American and live in America. And I said, no, you're not. I gave up my Dutch nationality to become Australian. So you can be in Australia, the land of milk and honey, quoting my father. And at 19, he went to America. He's a paramedic, a fireman, and he's in the American embassy in Mogadishu. He was in Baghdad for 5 years. I said, Rowan, we've done war. I'll send you money, whatever you need. But he said, no, Mum, in one day here, I earn what I earn in a month in Florida. So, he's older than you are. He's 67.
Oh, yeah. He's quite a lot older than me.
A lot older. Twice as old. He could be your father.
No, I'm not that young, unfortunately. So having lived this very rich and varied life, what are your aspirations that you haven't done yet? Is there anything that you still as unticked that you want to do, you're looking for achieving or doing, or what does the future hold? What would you like to do?
Just keep working, living life, loving life. Being happy. Yeah, I would love to travel more, but James only wants to travel to the States, which we might do by the end of the year. He's got some family there, and so we might do that. My problem is in traveling is that once you're, I think it's 80, the insurance, the health insurance is just like paying another airfare,
Oh, really?
Like when I go to Melbourne, I have to pay travel insurance because I've had open heart surgery to have 2 valves replaced, mended. And so it's not because of that, really, because I'm fine, but it's expensive for all of us, over 80 travel.
Yeah. One more benefit of being old.
Yes.
Nevertheless, you have a rich tapestry of life, and you've shared a lot. What about? I always end up by asking people, like, what inspires you? What keeps you going? Is there something that do you think of that motivates you when you feel a bit tired or you need a little bit of a kick?
I think it's just my belief, my God, really. I was brought up Church of England, but my father's Jewish, which we of course hid during the war. My mother isn't, so I'm not really Jewish. But when I was in Israel, I used to have dark hair, and they all talked Hebrew to me. They recognized the Jewishness in me, I suppose. And I didn't know until I was 19 that my father was Jewish. So we listen a lot to Dennis Prager. I don't know if you know him. He's like a rabbi in America, and he's just a man of common sense, People listen to him from all over the world, and Prager is doing a lot of good for the hopeless education system in America, and we could probably do with the same systems here of, teaching people about the country and history, which seems to be forgotten in the schools, geography and things like that. We just keep working on improving. Really, there's no end to it, no end to the possibilities.
Absolutely. It's a frivolous question to end on, but I always end up asking it. And I think for you, I'm kind of curious. What's a guilty pleasure that you have? Right? Do you have any guilty pleasures? I mean, you don't have to say guilty, but it's a silly way of saying it. But what do you enjoy that's nothing to do with yoga? Some frivolous pleasure that you just like a coffee, but don't say coffee because everyone says that.
Well, we have the biggest film society here of anywhere in Australia. And I go to all the films. Like last night, I saw a Finnish film, but it was spoken in Swedish. They speak Swedish in Finland too, so I could understand it. And I go to those films, Italian, because I have spoken Italian in the past. But because I never use my languages here, I go really to all the films. So last night I went. Probably tonight there's another one. I don't know what it is, but it's all...
Any language you can go and understand it.
Japanese. I studied Japanese very hard for 4 years, but it'd take me another 10 years to say I know it. They're about 29 in the kanji. You don't know a language unless you can read and write it. And the kanji sometimes take 29 strokes. But they have to be done in the right order. And my teacher used to just know exactly, no, you did number 3 at 23 instead of 3. How he could tell, I couldn't tell. So it's a big subject, just like learning Sanskrit, I think.
I have heard that, yeah. So is there any teacher who you'd like to study with left, whether yoga or spiritual, or have you done your education now?
We really stopped going to teachers because when we were in America traveling around, we used to have the Yoga Journal Convention in Estes Park, in the east of USA. There used to be big 300 teachers from all over the world. All the people you can imagine were there. So we worked with them all, and we decided really that we're much better off doing our own practice, just getting on our mat and doing our own practice, because a lot of the time we were either held back, like Felicity Green. I don't know if she's still alive, who is a very highfalutin Iyengar yoga teacher. We hosted her to come to Brisbane from the USA, although she's from South Africa. And I said to Graham Northfield, you've got to come. And of course, Graham does a beautiful handstand from Uttanasana straight into a handstand in the middle of the room. And she made him go on the wall. I thought, nonsense. Look. We're meant to progress our students, not hold them back, And so this sort of thing was happening. And we thought, we're just wasting our time. We've got to just get on our mat and do our own work. And so we just worked together.
Thank you, Nicky, for the time. Where can people find you these days? Are you still teaching? Is there any courses coming up or anything that you want to promote now?
Well, yes, I've got it in front of me, but I am offering Discovery Foundation, Therapy A and Therapy B. They're two courses that we do. They're really based on the things I've learned over the years, but also on my experience at the Crippled Children's Centre and the Blind Institute, you know.
And is that in Australia or is it online as well?
In Cairns, at the yoga school. That's the yoga school we started and sold, and we're still invited back to teach. James was also invited back to teach, but he reckons he's retired. And he teaches a fun class. I always say he lets people get away with murder, which isn't good for them. At one stage in Cairns, he said, I'm retired. You take my classes. I said, this does not bode well, because the people who go to his class don't want to come to mine because they don't want to work, you know? So anyway, I started teaching them, and then I'd see people seeing who was teaching and walking away. And at the end, I went home to him and I said, I'm treading all over your garden and spoiling everything. I'm unretiring you. You get back on your mat. But now, he's definitely retired. And he's only 71, I think.
Only 71. Well, I hope I get to catch you next time in Australia. I just missed you where we were. But
yes.
Next time, I'd love to meet you in person and study with you.
How often do you come?
Well, I've been coming once a year recently, in the last couple of years. So let's see if that precedent continues, then I'll certainly make sure that somehow I find you next year.
Yeah, right.
Namo Namah Shri Siddhi Vinayak Namo Namah Ishta